Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Matte. Thanks so much for being here. Our website, as always, is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Today we have a doubleheader for you. Yet again, we're going to be covering, of course, the non-event that was the Epstein files. The Trump administration claiming after basically so many months and years of hyping up the Epstein files, this week saying, actually nothing to see here. Well, former CIA officer John Kiriakou will be here to give his take on what's going on.
It's always fascinating talking to John. He has amazing stories. And also, it should be known, people may be interested in knowing, that John is the only person to spend any time in prison over the CIA's torture program. This is a program in which he did not participate, but he blew the whistle on it. So, of course, in the United States, you don't ever get in trouble for committing crimes. You get in trouble for exposing them.
Well, speaking of exposing crimes, in the second half of the show, we'll also hear from Marta Havryshko. She is a returning guest. She is a visiting assistant professor at Clark University, and she's Ukrainian, and she's very critical of the Ukrainian government, also very critical of the Russian government. But what she has to say about Ukraine contradicts a lot of the narratives we get here in the West that is used to sustain the proxy war there, which a lot of people have kind of forgotten about because it's been going on for so long and there's so many other horrible crises in the world, namely the genocide in Gaza. But Ukraine's still happening, and as we'll hear in today's interview with Marta, things are very bleak.
What else is bleak is the news here, the news there. And I guess that's a great transition to start the four basic food groups. Democrats suck, Republicans suck. Isn't that weird? Isn't that terrible? What bleak news do we have from Democrats suck?
Well, the main source of bleakness right now for Democrats is this light onto New York City, onto the Big Apple. Zohran, his successful campaign in the Democratic primary for mayor, and how are corporate Democrats grappling with the fact that this charismatic young challenger is set to become the next mayor of New York City on the Democratic ticket. Well, they're handling this by saying he's not welcome inside their party. As former Biden challenger, Dean Phillips, just told CNN.
Is there room for you and Mamdani in the Democratic Party?
You know, I think it's a fine question. I think it's one that many Republicans have been asking about, whether there's room for traditional conservatives in a party now led by MAGA Republicans like Donald Trump. The answer ultimately, I think, is no. You know, we do share many of the same values. In fact,
great. Can you leave the party, Dean Phillips? Can we get that in writing? That would be great. Please retire right now.
Most Americans share a lot of the same values, but as a political party, yes, you want diversity. You want some differences of opinion, perspective, life story, politics, and experience. But when you have socialists in the Democratic Party, I don't know how anybody could argue that that would be beneficial for the party or for the country. Therein lies the great challenge. Same thing on the right, Omar. Is MAGA the future of the Republican Party? If it is, there is going to be a new, grand, successful third party in America, because the overwhelming majority of Americans want neither far left or far right politics. They want decency, they want common sense, competency, and cooperation. And no party right now is elevating candidates who represent those ideals.
Decency, competence, and cooperation and common sense. All right. Decency, cooperation, common sense. Cooperation, common sense, competency. I think he's maybe starting his own third party, the Triple C party.
The DCCC?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Decency, competency, cooperation. And what was the last one? It already escaped me. That's how meaningful it is.
He's basically saying that everybody wants a centrist corporate Democrat. That's what he's basically saying. That's his fantasy that he's still clinging to. And it's not a question of like, if the Republican Party is now MAGA, they are like MAGA, and that's the base of the party now. So it's not as if there's like a bunch of Republicans dying to leave. There's like a small sliver of like, I don't know, I guess you want to call it like old school Republicans who don't like Donald Trump, but like
right.
Republicans are MAGA. And look, he says we want diversity of opinion to the Democratic Party and diversity of background, but you can't have a socialist. But in Zohran Mamdani's case, like, what does that mean to be a socialist? Basically, he supports universal health care, universal pre-K. He wants to have free buses for people. He wants to have government subsidized grocery stores so that in some communities where there are no healthy food options, right, or barely any food options at all, that you have ways to serve people so that people can be fed. These aren't radical policies, actually, that he is pursuing. And of course, he also wants a rent freeze, which is also not socialist. It's just kind of trying to basically make the city affordable
Exactly.
for working people.
Right. I wonder what Dean Phillips thinks of like FDR, if he thought he was a big, scary socialist who should have been banned from the Democratic Party.
Although I do think they're genuinely alarmed by Zohran Mamdani's progressive policies. I think another issue is the fact that he sees Palestinians as equal human beings.
Right.
And the Democrats have played this game where that's just simply not allowed, at least in the leadership of the party. If you want to run for president, if you want to be a Senate or House leader, you have to bow down to Israel. And now you have the potential next mayor of New York City not playing that game. And that also to them is not welcome.
Right. And I think they're afraid of saying that, right? Because the irony is that the Zionists are really messed up, because I think that they helped Zohran Mamdani because they kind of tried to make this a referendum on Israel. And I think a lot of people were disgusted by it because it just seems so irrelevant and so forced. I mean, you do certain things as the mayor of New York related to foreign policy. There's some symbolic things. They're like, agreements with foreign governments and stuff. But I think they were so over the top that it backfired. And so now I think that the Democrats realize if they try to vilify Zohran over Palestine, they're just going to make him all the more popular, probably.
So as Dean Phillips is basically saying that Zohran Mamdani is not welcome inside his party, Joe Scarborough of MSNBC asks a very good question. Like, why is it that corporate Democrats like Dean Phillips can't reach anybody, whereas Zohran Mamdani can? This is Joe Scarborough.
And why is it that in the Democratic Party, the three most compelling figures, the mayoral candidate, Bernie Sanders, and AOC, the three most compelling figures since the election have been far left of, let's say, the mainstream of a lot of Americans? Why can't moderate Democrats, why can't conservative moderate Democrats like you make that same compelling message?
Geez, I don't know, Joe. Maybe because they have no message.
Yeah.
And people are tired of it and they have nothing to offer anyone anymore, except worshiping Israel and not being as ghoulish on some issues as Republicans. For example, right. Corporate Democrats are, to their credit, not supporting Medicaid cuts, which is great, but people want more than that. And in Zohran Mamdani and Bernie Sanders and AOC, you have people who champion workers and who actually have concrete policies that they're willing to fight for. Maybe that's why the so-called moderates can't reach anybody.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because I think, it's very revealing that Scarborough presents Bernie, AOC, and Mamdani as far from the mainstream, because something that Bernie really helped show the world is that these things that are called radical are radical and fringe among the elites, but not among people. So there's nothing actually radical in the idea of having to not die because you don't have enough money.
Well, another issue that corporate Democrats face is that people rightly don't see them as having any real convictions and that they'll just say whatever. A good example of this is Chuck Schumer, who made a lot of noise when he stood up in Congress and gave a speech basically denouncing Benjamin Netanyahu and saying that he has to go, right? And this was supposed to be some huge shift from Chuck Schumer, who's a lifelong defender of the Israeli government. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu just visited Washington, and guess who is posing in a picture with Benjamin Netanyahu? None other than Chuck Schumer. Here he is. So there's Chuck Schumer alongside some Republican colleagues with Benjamin Netanyahu, the same guy who Chuck Schumer said, has to go because he's so awful for Israel and, this is not who Israel is. Well, Chuck Schumer is someone who's willing to pose with the guy who he called on to resign.
Right.
Which is, of course, on top of the fact that Chuck Schumer is a complete, is totally subservient to Israel. Right. He also just doesn't have any principles that he's willing to stick to.
Yeah, but Aaron, look at him. He is boldly looking away. He's not looking at the camera. And that is his way of registering his resistance.
Yeah, well, he probably thinks exactly that.
Yeah,
that's probably what he wants to think. But I'm sorry, don't pose with the guy if you want him to resign.
Right. True. Very true. Yeah. For Republican Suck, we have an adorable kind of suite of developments. People may remember that back in May, Trump announced he would be lifting sanctions from Syria. And in his executive order on the matter from the end of June, he also declared he would take Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, which is al-Qaeda's former affiliate in Syria. That was led by Abu Mohammed al-Jilani, now the leader of Syria, off the designated foreign terrorist list. Now, here's a video of Trump from this week at a dinner he hosted for Netanyahu and the Israeli delegation. And listen to him talking about this decision.
You know, at the request of a lot of countries in the surrounding area of the Middle East, including Bibi, we took the sanctions off Syria, and I met the new leader. I was very impressed by him. Somebody said, well, he comes from a very tough background. I said, well, you know, I'm not that surprised. It's a tough part of the world.
So, Aaron, I want to pass it to you as someone who's really studied a lot, researched a lot, and written a lot about Syria and HTS. Anything you want to share about this tough guy?
Well, yeah, he's the founding leader of al-Qaeda in Syria and a former deputy leader of ISIS. And they were responsible for not only, attacking U.S. soldiers, which Trump and other neocons want to forget about now, but also sectarian killings in Syria, which are still ongoing under Jilani's watch. In fact, Reuters recently did an investigation about how the slaughter of more than 1,000 Alawite civilians after regime change in Syria last year was linked to forces under Jilani's control. But now that Syria is basically in the pocket of the U.S. and Israel because they overthrew a government that was in the axis of resistance, and there's talk of Syria and Israel reaching some sort of normalization agreement or some sort of tacit agreement, basically Syria no longer being a part of the bloc that resists Israel. Now we can say that this guy, al-Jilani, the former leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, is, great guy. He's tough, and let's remove sanctions on his government.
Right. So they're removing sanctions on his government. They're also removing the terrorist designation from his organization. But guys, this makes a lot of sense because the Trump administration and Marco Rubio in particular have decided to focus on a much worse villain, a much bigger threat, a much bigger terrorist. And they are, in fact, imposing sanctions on this terrorist. We actually, full transparency, we once interviewed this terrorist, and this terrorist is UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese. And let's take a look at this announcement from Rubio. Today, I'm imposing sanctions on UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese for her illegitimate and shameful efforts to prompt the International Criminal Court to take action against U.S. and Israeli officials, companies, and executives. Albanese's campaign of political and economic warfare against the United States and Israel will no longer be tolerated. We will always stand by our partners in their right to self-defense. The United States will continue to take whatever action we deem necessary to respond to lawfare and protect our sovereignty and that of our allies. So just to review, the person who we are sanctioning is someone who opposes genocide and who had the temerity to lay out in an excellent report the way that different companies are complicit in genocide. But the person who commits war crimes gets to have sanctions lifted off of his country and gets to have his organization welcomed into the non-terrorist world. So that kind of says everything you need to know about the rank hypocrisy of the United States.
And someone to show the contrast in really simple terms is Trita Parsi. He wrote this. The man below is the founder of al-Qaeda in Syria. The U.S. just took his organization off its terror list and lifted sanctions on him. The woman below is the UN rapporteur on Israel and Palestine. The U.S. is about to impose sanctions on her. Let that sink in. Yes. And I hope people can now, who maybe were confused by the war in Syria, who heard maybe nasty things about the stance that people like me took, I hope that this contrast can help you understand why some of us were opposed to regime change in Syria. This was never about bringing freedom and democracy to Syria. This was about just basically destabilizing a country that was part of a resistance bloc to Israel. That's what the dirty war in Syria was for. Exploiting internal divisions, exploiting legitimate grievances inside a country to fuel a humanitarian catastrophe and ultimately support an insurgency that was led by al-Qaeda. And that's who now takes power. And because the government now in power will essentially not challenge the U.S. and Israel in the region, then their sanctions can be removed. And someone like Francesca Albanese, who challenges Israel simply by trying to apply the law to Israel, she has sanctions on her. So that contrast is really important, understanding not only how just what a fallacy the so-called rules-based international order is, exposing just how subservient international institutions and governments are to Israel, but also just the aims behind our regime change wars. It's always to advance hegemony. It's never to advance human rights and freedom.
Really want to give a shout out to Francesca for being so fearless, despite the fact that she's not only smeared as an anti-Semite, which is a totally baseless accusation, but now she's being sanctioned by the United States. The world of fast fashion has complicated clothing production by shipping cheap parts around the world to whoever can sew them the cheapest. And now you're paying the price with rising costs and tariffs. Back in the 1960s, 95% of clothing Americans bought were made in the USA. Today, it's only 3%. That's why we like American Giant. American Giant is American-made, producing their clothes locally and giving back to the communities that support them. At a time when fast fashion is dominating the fashion space, it's nice to feel good about what we wear. American Giant is about durable, not disposable products. They make clothes built to last. So buying from American Giant is an investment, not just in clothes, but in a community trying to do things the right way. Support American-made, tariff-free clothing with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code USEFUL at american-giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code USEFUL at american-giant.com. What do we got for Isn't That Weird?
For Isn't That Weird, let's turn to a look back at the Kamala Harris campaign. And, you know, it's worth recalling that Kamala Harris had the opportunity to distance herself from Joe Biden, especially on the issue of the Gaza genocide, which made it so hard for so many people to vote for Democrats as much as they feared the Donald Trump campaign. Well, Kamala Harris was not willing to distance herself from Joe Biden and just was overall not very good at this campaigning thing. And we got a new anecdote about this from Kareem Rahma. He is the host of the very popular social media account Subway Takes, where he interviews basically people on the New York City subway or foreign subways too, and asks for their take. And so he just revealed that right before the vote in the U.S. presidential election last year, Kamala Harris did a subway take. But Kamala Harris was so bad that both parties decided it wasn't worth airing. So this is what Kareem Rahma said about Kamala Harris's ill-fated appearance on Subway Takes.
They emailed me.
They emailed an email from the
DNC.
Okay.
And they said, hey, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are really interested in being on your show. I said, that sounds cool.
Okay.
I'll at least get to tell my daughter that I met the potential president of the United States.
Yeah.
And so I said yes, based on the fact that it would be a good story. And also they both had good takes.
What happened with Kamala?
Her take was really confusing and weird and not good. And so mutually agreed that we shouldn't publish it.
I see.
And I got lucky because I didn't want to be blamed for her losing.
Her take was that bad?
It was really, really bad, and it was like didn't make any sense. I can tell you, it was bacon as a spice. Bacon as a spice.
Bacon is a spice.
So Kamala Harris's take right before a presidential election was that bacon is a spice. And come on, staffers, I don't even blame Kamala Harris for this. Right. You have staffers for this reason. So people workshop this, they come up with the best take. And especially before an election, you want to I understand they were probably thinking it would show her more, her human side if they did something non-political, but come on, get your message out. Instead, they went with bacon as a spice. And yeah, it was so bad that they canceled themselves. And they, yet another opportunity for Kamala Harris was squandered.
I mean, you would have thought that she would have learned her lesson from spice-related commentary from when Hillary Clinton said that she kept hot sauce in her purse.
That's a great point. That was so phony when Hillary Clinton claimed that, she was asked, what's the one thing you bring around with you everywhere? And she was like, well, hot sauce in my bag. And it was I don't know what I think the thought there was they would reach African-American voters with that, right? Yeah. That was the idea behind that. It was just so condescending and phony. And no wonder that was a loser. So yes, you're so right. Kamala, it's they adopted one of the dumbest Hillary Clinton tactics, losing Hillary Clinton tactics. Oh. It's just, it's all the ineptitude of the Democrats. Just it never ceases to amaze.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And now we're living with the consequences. And I don't want to downplay the differences between the two parties, because Republicans now, we just saw this with their so-called big beautiful bill, which is such a monstrosity. It's so awful. They're increasing the Pentagon budget. They're cutting taxes for the ultra wealthy. They're taking away Medicaid and food stamps from millions of vulnerable people. And Democrats, for all their faults, wouldn't have done something so ghoulish. They wouldn't. And it's important to recognize that difference. But Democrats just made it so hard to vote for them. And we continue to get new reminders as to how, that they couldn't even do a proper subway tick.
Yeah, they did not make it easy. I mean, speaking of Clinton callbacks, I mean, remember they had Bill Clinton address a crowd in Michigan? And, this isn't the Bill Clinton of 15 years ago. He used to be a very good panderer, but he's kind of lost the art. And so he wasn't able to pander at all. He just came off as incredibly offensive, which he is, but he used to be better at hiding it. You got to know when you've lost your gift. Yeah. And of course, I'm referring to Bill Clinton basically arguing that Jews have a theological justification for being in Israel.
Yeah, great job, Democrats, sending that message to Michigan, home to the country's largest Arab American population. Really wonderful job. Thank you. Thank you, Democrats, for that.
So for Isn't That Terrible, let's take a listen to someone who we haven't covered in a while on this show. In fact, Aaron, I think we haven't covered him since you've joined. But the lovely right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk, this week during an episode of his eponymous show on the far-right network, Real America's Voice, he made some pretty interesting comments about where to lay the blame for the at least 120 deaths that occurred when flash floods struck Texas. Let's hear what he has to say.
The Democrats, they're so despicable. The Democrats are not lifting a finger to remember the well over 100 people that have died in Texas Hill Country. What you are not being told by the media anywhere is that the death toll likely would not have been as high if it wasn't for DEI. This Texas tragedy is just the latest example. It's not just incompetence. This is DEI working to undermine meritocratic institutions, and more people likely died than otherwise would have because of DEI.
Okay, so basically he's saying too many people of color have jobs, and that's why all these people died in flash floods. It is so disgusting, and it's so evidence-free, and it's a good reminder, speaking of callbacks, to when Elon Musk and former Fox News host Megyn Kelly and others tried to blame the LA fires on DEI. Now, what's great about these claims is they don't feel any pressure to provide any evidence. It's just such an obvious deflection. It also is a deflection from what really is the cause, and that is climate change denial, austerity measures, and those are implemented in many cases to finance the rich through tax cuts and also give big oil handouts and subsidies. But again, no proof whatsoever that DEI had anything to do with it. And we don't know the exact culprit yet, but it is important to remember that certain things were done that cannot have been helpful, that are very dangerous in themselves. So key positions have been cut as a result of Trump's DOGE cuts, including a warning coordination meteorologist position, which helps coordinate evacuations with weather forecasters and emergency managers and the public. Many are saying that while there were cuts, it wasn't understaffed at the time of the floods, but experts have noted that these key vacancies could have played a role. And of course, the NOAA's new budget, as a result of Trump's cuts under his One Big Beautiful Bill, would now essentially close all NOAA labs, including the lab with a key tool for predicting floods.
Everyone has their boogeyman. Right. Democrats for a long time blamed Russia for everything. The MAGA people have many, but I mean, they like to blame many different sources, undocumented immigrants, but certainly every single disaster, you can always blame DEI.
Yeah. And, again, there is much to be investigated and demonstrated, but obviously it's not good to cut these positions, to cut funding for things like this. And it more generally, like warmer temperatures increase the amount of water vapor held by clouds, which allows for more torrential downpours. And that's just established fact.
And those have been your 4 basic food groups. For this week's interview, we have 2 different guests. First up is John Kiriakou. He is a former CIA officer, and he's going to help us sort out what's the deal with Jeffrey Epstein, because the Trump administration wants us to believe now there's nothing to see here. Trump himself even said recently that, why are you guys asking me about Jeffrey Epstein? When it was Trump's own top officials, including Dan Bongino, who's the deputy head of the FBI, who were constantly hyping up the Epstein files as this huge, massive cover-up from the deep state and Democrats. And once Trump came to office, he was going to expose it all. And now the Trump administration is saying, hey, there's nothing to see here.
And who better to talk about this with us than John Kiriakou, who himself is a major truth teller. He is a CIA whistleblower. He's the only person to have gone to prison over the CIA torture program. And he was a CIA analyst and case officer. So he has really great insights into what could have happened with these Epstein files and how the CIA and other intelligence agencies are fond of destroying evidence.
And Katie did this interview solo, so let's go now to Katie's interview with John Kiriakou.
Welcome back to the show, John Kiriakou.
Good to see you again.
You too. It's always a pleasure. You're an amazing storyteller and guest. And we want to talk to you about Epstein.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
How do you like that?
Yeah, big change from what he was saying before.
We're going to get to the bottom of it. He's going to release all the documents. He's going to release the videos. And then you're still talking about this?
Right. Yeah. And he's hiding behind the tragedy in Texas. So what are your thoughts? What happened? I mean, I did see that on both Piers Morgan and on Fox News, you said that you feel material was probably destroyed. So can you elaborate on that? And why you think that?
Sure. At the CIA, even though there are laws like the Federal Records Act, which specifically says you cannot destroy documents, they destroy documents all the time. I mean, MK Ultra, even after Congress specifically told the Director of Central Intelligence that he had to preserve the MK Ultra documents, he went back to headquarters and they destroyed 80% of the tens of thousands of pages of documents that they had on MK Ultra. So now, we don't really know what is true and what's not true about MK Ultra because of the cover-up.
Right.
Same thing at the CIA with the torture videos. As soon as word leaked out that there were videos of Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being tortured, Harriet Miers, who was the White House counsel at the time in the George W. Bush presidency, Harriet Miers specifically told Jose Rodriguez, the deputy director for operations at the CIA, and Gina Haspel, don't destroy the tapes. And Gina Haspel put them in an industrial grinder and destroyed them.
Right.
So, why would we think that the FBI would be any different, especially when it comes to allegations that some of the most powerful and some of the wealthiest men in the world are implicated in the scandal? Some of the most powerful politicians in the world may be implicated in this scandal. Right. So I could absolutely see the FBI destroying documents. And we could speculate as to what the reason would be. It could be just cash on the barrelhead. It may be as simple as that. It may be that there's more to this so-called deep state than people think there is. So yeah, I don't trust that just like like this revelation, like, oh my goodness, it turns out there are no documents, there are no dossiers, there are no videos except for child porn. Come on, man. Going back to the 1990s and you couldn't find anything?
Yeah, it's pretty implausible.
I don't buy it.
Right. I mean, it is just one of the latest examples of Trump and his administration promising to take things on, ranging from, the deep state to draining the swamp to the military industrial complex. And then once they're in power, they don't. Or being America firsters and then saying ridiculous things about Israel. I mean, everyone from Kash Patel to Tammy Bruce making statements that are embarrassingly subordinate to Israel.
Yes.
So, I mean, is this just because Trump is really good at saying the right things? I always think of him kind of like as a stand-up comedian. He knows how to work a crowd. He knows how to get a good response from people. But then in terms of actual policy, he doesn't seem to line up.
I think that he's really not terribly interested in policy. I don't think he ever has been. And certainly we've had other presidents that weren't interested in policy. But yeah, I think that he says whatever happens to be, at the top of his mind, and whether he ends up contradicting himself later or not, he doesn't really care. I think that ideologically, he's a Zionist, and I think he's so much so that he's unwilling to bend. When I was serving in Bahrain, the Emir of Bahrain said something that has always stuck in my mind. He said the last American president to give the Arabs a fair shake was George H.W. Bush.
Right.
And every president since then has just been in the pay of the Israelis, directly or indirectly. And the Arabs don't even pretend to think that they're going to get a fair shake. But we're seeing it in spades in this administration.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because I think that Trump is, and this is why I thought there was like a very small chance that he'd be better than Biden, because I think that Trump, maybe he's a Zionist, but I think his Zionism is a lot less strong, a lot weaker than Biden's, like who was more, and generally I think Biden is more of an ideologue than Trump. I mean, I think Trump's pretty not, ideological, much more opportunistic.
Definitely a populist. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, full of it, but I think just in general, what the bottom line for him is real estate more than it is any kind of ideology. But as someone who was in the CIA, what did you observe about the relationship between the United States and Israel?
Oh, more than any other relationship that we have with any other country in the world, the relationship is dictated on Capitol Hill. Not at the White House, but on Capitol Hill. I was on a podcast earlier today. We were talking about this exact issue, and I said when I went to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 2009, I was the senior investigator there working for John Kerry. I had been in the job like a day or 2 days, and these lobbyists came by. It was a parade of lobbyists, right? Every lobbyist comes through at one time or another, but this was the first group of lobbyists. And they came to the office and they said, "Hey, congratulations. So great to have you on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We're from AIPAC, and we want to bring you on an all expenses paid trip to the Holy Land." I was like, "Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Oh, we have a tour already laid out. We're going to take you to all the Christian holy sites, and you're going to see what a first world country we are, and we are America's greatest ally, and we're the only democracy in the Middle East." I was like, "No, thank you. Well, there were a bunch of people who went. I didn't go. I even was a little bit rude, and I said, "Look, if I want to go to Israel, I'm going to pay for my own trip to Israel, but I don't want you guys to pay for a trip to Israel." And I didn't go. But others went. Well, it turns out they do this with literally every staff for every congressman, 435 of them in the House and 100 of them in the Senate. That is money well spent. And then they contribute millions upon millions of dollars to campaigns, congressional campaigns mostly. And man, if you look at Israel cockeyed, they'll primary you.
Right.
And so they've gotten to the point, or they've gotten us to the point where people are so afraid to say anything about Israel, anything, because if you say, if there's any criticism at all, no matter how mild, even if the criticism is of Benjamin Netanyahu as a politician, you're anti-Semitic. And then you've got to dig yourself out of that hole.
Yeah.
So most elected officials, they just don't want to deal with it. So they just go along.
And what can you tell us about the relationship between Israeli and U.S. Intelligence?
It is not close on a personal level. We never liked Mossad. They don't like us. The Israelis spy on the United States. And they deny and deny and deny. In fact, I was on Piers Morgan a couple of weeks ago debating, oh my God, Alan Dershowitz. I was with Scott Horton, right, and we were debating Alan Dershowitz and Danny, what was his name? Yalon. He was the former head of Mossad, general. And I said, the Israelis spy on the United States. And he said, no, that's not true. When the Americans caught Jonathan Pollard in 1995, we stopped spying on the United States. And I said, with all due respect, General, that's not true, because I didn't start at the CIA until 1990. And the chief of security warned us that there were two Israeli intelligence officers assigned to the Israeli embassy in Washington and 187 undeclared Israeli intelligence officers spread all across the United States, stealing American secrets after having penetrated our defense contractors. So with all due respect, you're dissembling here. The Israelis spy on the United States.
What do you think of the way that Trump has gone from being America firster to someone who is a pretty sycophantic to Bibi? Now, to be fair, it's a kind of circle jerk where they both really suck up to each other. And of course, you have Netanyahu, I mean, hilariously nominating Donald Trump for a Nobel
Peace Prize.
Yeah. What do you think of this?
Well, circle jerk is the best way to say it, actually. I won't get into the specifics of what a circle jerk is. People can Google it. But when Trump dropped the F-bomb, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that was specifically meant for Netanyahu.
Okay.
Because Trump wanted his ceasefire between the Israelis and the Iranians, and Netanyahu was like, well, maybe we're going to launch just one more barrage. And then he's like, cut it the fuck out, or whatever it was he said.
Yeah.
They don't know what the fuck they're doing, I think is what he said. That was specifically meant for Netanyahu, because the Iranians only react. They don't proactively attack Israel.
Right. Despite the way the media covers it.
Correct. And so there was just that little blip for a day, and then it was all past. I was driving to Capitol Hill last night. You couldn't turn left on 17th Street. You couldn't turn left on 15th Street. Pennsylvania Avenue was closed. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, are they just going to shut down the city? I said, why is it like this? And the Uber driver said, Bibi's in town. Nobody's moving anywhere in Washington. Right. And then I talked to a contact of mine today who happens to be doing some work for the Israeli embassy. And he said that Netanyahu's staying for a week. This isn't just an in and out visit where he just meets with the president, shake hands, does a photo op and leaves. He's here all week. Right. That gives you an idea of how close this relationship is. I think Netanyahu was sick and tired of Joe Biden and the Democrats, even though Biden and the Democrats gave them literally everything they wanted. But he's far more comfortable with Donald Trump because I think he's able to manipulate Donald Trump.
I mean, maybe both of them, right? Wasn't he able? Isn't that kind of like a bipartisan phenomenon?
It really is. It really is. Katie, if I could add one thing too. Years ago, 2008 to 2012, I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I was an adjunct professor of intelligence studies at Liberty University, which was Jerry Falwell's evangelical Christian, university. To make it even worse, in the Jesse Helms School of Government.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Okay. Yeah. And when they called me to offer me this job, I said, why would you guys call me? I said, we probably disagree on 99% of the issues. Why me? And without missing a beat, the dean said, because torture is not Christian.
Ah, interesting.
And I said, okay, I'll take it. And I ended up really, truly enjoying my time there. Nice guys. We disagreed on everything.
Right.
But genuinely nice people. I am still, for reasons that are unclear to me, on the Liberty University listserv. And every once in a while, I just can't remain silent. And so I have to crack on them. They are so... what word can I use? They are so pro-Israel as to be fanatical about it. And they can't even explain to you why they're so pro-Israel. I mean, deep down, I know what it is. It's because they want all the Jews to return to Israel so that the Messiah can come and Armageddon and the apocalypse and, that whole thing, which is all, fantasy.
Right.
But I crack on them all the time. And I say, St. Porphyrios Church in Gaza, the oldest continually operating Christian church on earth. And the Israelis bomb it to rubble and kill everybody inside. By the way, every one of them was either a woman or a child. And you guys don't say anything about that.
Right.
You don't say anything that they're literally wiping out the Palestinian Christian community in the West Bank after having already wiped it out in Gaza. You guys don't say a word, but God forbid somebody should criticize Benjamin Netanyahu. All of a sudden, we're anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
I said, you guys are anti-Christian because you've literally not lifted a finger to help Palestine's Christians who have been there for 2,000 years. 2,000 years. You don't say a word about that. And then nobody says anything.
Yeah, and of course, it's also not very Christian to support genocide.
No,
and it's also not very pro. I mean, we know this, as you said, it's totally opportunistic and transactional. They are not friends of the Jews. I mean,
no, they're not.
To utilize us, and like you mentioned, so we'll all go back. I think 400 of us get to survive, and the rest burn for all eternity.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they make it seem like. In fact, you know what? There was a scene in The Sopranos about exactly that. That somebody said, well, they're great friends of Israel. And then Hesh said, oh, don't let that fool you. They only like Israel because they want us to all go back there so they can kill us all.
Wow.
And that's really what it comes down to.
I did not know that. I'm going to have to watch that now. Yeah. So on Fox News with Marie Baratomo, Netanyahu made some comments about how he has, quote, broken the Iran access, end quote, and helped usher in a new Middle East. What are your reactions to this claim? As someone who has worked extensively in the region and written about Iran before, is there any validity to his claims?
I hate to say yes. I think it's temporary because people aren't stupid and the world is constantly changing. And so the Iranians and the Lebanese and probably the Palestinians will figure something out. But if you look at just the last 6 months, well, the last 8 months, he decapitated Hezbollah, decapitated it. For all intents and purposes, it has ceased to exist. It's going to come back.
Yeah.
But right now, it's nothing. He essentially, working with the Turks, overthrew Bashar al-Assad. I'm no supporter of Bashar al-Assad, but I always said, if you're concerned about Christian communities, Bashar al-Assad was the only thing standing between the Christian communities and complete annihilation.
Yeah.
So Assad's gone too. And Gaza's been just, vaporized. It's almost gone in and of itself. So for the time being, yeah, he's broken the Iranian axis. He still has the Houthis to worry about, but they're more of a little, pimple on the butt of the Israeli body politic than they are a real threat to anything. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start, bombarding the Houthis.
Right.
But the Houthis are so poor and they have so little. I mean, how many $1 million bombs are you going to spend to blow up $10,000 drones? Really? Is it worth it? When the Israelis implemented this operation against Hezbollah with the pagers and the cell phones, right, my phone rang off the hook with former agency friends. Like, what do you think about this? And I said, holy shit, this is like, on the one hand, it's a crime against humanity, or a war crime, depending on your position. Clearly, innocent civilians, including children, were hurt or killed because these things just arbitrarily blew up. And, we saw reports of people having taken their phones out of their pockets and they put it on the table so they could have dinner with their families, and it blew up and killed the 9-year-old girl that it was next to. So yeah, war crime, but absolutely brilliant from an intelligence operations perspective. Imagine the moving parts that went into an operation like this, where you've got to control literally everything from the point of manufacturing through the supply chain across half the globe and then into the hands of the consumer. Absolutely incredible. I don't know if we'll ever be able to figure out how they pulled this off. Right. And then, working with the Turks, who the Israelis either love or hate, depending on what day of the week it happens to be, they came to this agreement that if you help us screw Assad, we'll help you screw the Kurds. And the Turks said, sounds good to us. Next thing you know, the Assad family runs off to Moscow. Bashar comes back for a week, fills the plane with riches, and then he runs off to Moscow. Right. So the Israelis have been very busy, and they've been very successful at it, for better or for worse.
For worse, I would say.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting because you have some people who say, oh, that was not, I mean, obviously there's a lot of people say it's technologically brilliant, but then you have people saying, oh, it was targeted. It wasn't targeted at all. As you just pointed out, it killed.
It wasn't targeted.
Yeah. And, Leon Panetta, who's not exactly a peacenik, he said it was an act of terrorism.
Yeah. That shocked me, because I would have expected the likes of Leon Panetta to say, bravo, Mossad, right. Oh my God, we should all aspire to do things like that. But even he said it was an act of terrorism, which it was.
Right.
It was.
So going back to Epstein, what is the relationship between Epstein and Israel? And what do we know about who was on the plane, who engaged in, basically sex crimes?
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
And to hear the full interview with John, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com. And it's a great interview. I really got to say, always love talking to him.
All right, up next, we have a returning guest, Useful Idiots. I spoke to Marta Havryshko. She is visiting assistant professor at the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University. And we talked to her about the ongoing proxy war in Ukraine, which is not coming to an end, despite Trump's promises to broker a peace deal within 24 hours. He's now been in office for, almost half a year. And this war is ongoing. And it's not going well for everybody, especially Ukrainians, as we will hear now from our guest, Marta Havryshko. Marta Havryshko, thank you so much for coming back to Useful Idiots.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we covered Ukraine on the show, so I just want to start by asking you, what is going on? Or for people who are not following the day-to-day of the conflict, what do you think is most important for people to understand about the current situation inside Ukraine?
So the current situation is very dire due to different developments. First of all, severe Russian attacks. Now, it was a new record when Russia, during one night, sent more than 700 drones across Ukraine to attack different Ukrainian cities and to attack Ukrainian infrastructure infrastructure. And of course, we have the damage of residential buildings as well, and deaths and injuries of civilian people, including children. So basically, war is one of the most important factor. But the second factor, and according to some polls, is even more, it's even bigger trouble for some Ukraine, is the corruption. Almost every single day, we have new corruption scandals. For example, the deputy prime minister Chernyshov, who recently had business travel abroad, and some journalists assumed that he escaped from Ukraine because he was accused of corruption. And this is huge corruption scandal because the damage to Ukraine budget was approximately 1 billion hryvnias. And guess what? Ukraine court just released him without, fire him, and with, this bail that is very small in comparison to damage to Ukraine government. Every single day, Ukrainian people see how, top politicians, members of parliament, members of government, and their relatives buy new cars, buy new apartment in Ukraine and abroad, in US and in Europe. But every single day, the same ordinary citizens are required to donate for the army, to buy necessary stuff, even to buy weapon. So basically, this situation, the corruption, still one of the biggest problem in Ukraine. And recently, Ukraine people found out that many prominent journalists, they basically are cooperating with security service of Ukraine and with military intelligence of Ukraine. But at the same time, they label themselves as, independent journalists, investigative journalists. So basically, it's a total distrust nowadays in Ukraine in the whole, governmental system. And many people don't believe that, Zelensky team is handling the whole situation very good, because we observed this, clash, this disaster at the Oval Office. After that, Zelensky had several meetings with Trump, and Trump said, oh, it was a good conversation, but still, despite of this good conversation, we observe how Trump held delivering weapons to Ukraine. So basically, the situation is very dire, and nobody understands what is the plan, how to defeat Russia, how to regain lost territories with the enormous amount of deserters from Ukraine army. And numbers are different according to different sources, but at least 200,000 people deserted from Ukraine army. So the lack of the infantry people, the lack of soldiers, the lack of weapon, the lack of, these sufficient support from the West, because we observe even neighboring Poland, people are tired of this war, and many of them don't want, only approximately 15% of Polish people want to send their sons, their husbands to Ukraine to fight Russians. So basically, no one wants to send their loved ones to die for Ukraine, for this corrupted government, for this, ethno-nationalist, politics. And with neighboring countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania, we have so many, tensions in regard to, language question and other questions in humanitarian politics. So Ukraine people are frustrated, many of Ukraine people, and they don't see the light in the tunnel. What next? Merz talked about, towers for Ukraine. We will support as long as it took. But nowadays, what we observe: pause in delivering weapons, blah blah blah, many talks, and only small baby steps. And in this configuration, Ukraine has no chances to regain lost territories. Those who observe closely How many territories Ukraine is losing every single day? It at least 15, 20 square kilometers per day. And, those scandals with the lack of, this infrastructure that could halt this Russian offensive, so people asking, what have you, done for strengthening Ukraine defense system? Why? Where are those money? You talked about this all the time. You invaded Kursk and you explained Kursk region in Russia and you explained to ordinary people that this was such a great operation. And so now Russians are retaliating because they want to at least create this security zone, and prevent another attack of Kursk region, of Belgorod region. And so even Biletsky, this, celebrity Azov commander, when he was asked about Kursk operation, he said, at the beginning, it was a good, result because it boosts morale of Ukrainians, and humiliate Putin and his generals. Yeah. But what happened next? We will talk about this, history will judge. So he avoided even to express his criticism of this operation. And many, commanders are very critical of this operation. So basically, I believe the main mood in Ukraine is disappointment. Yeah. Regardless of these cheering comments from state control media that are trying, to talk about resilience and, those Ukrainians who want to rather die, experience glorious death for Mother Ukraine than, raise their children, in peacefully. So it's insane.
Let me show you a headline from a Ukrainian outlet that speaks to the long-term problems that Ukraine faces now on top of the immediate. This is what it said. Ukraine has already lost 40% of its working age population, according to the Ministry of Social Policy, which also says that to restore the economy, Ukraine needs to attract an additional 4 to 5 million workers. Talk to us about this and what this means for the country's future.
Exactly. When people, those in the West who are, I call them, keyboard warriors, who are, just cheering, waving Ukrainian flags, put on their social media, Ukrainian flags that stand with Ukraine, Slava Ukraini, and be brave as Ukraine. They just, they watch this, as a video game. They really, for them, it's very interesting, all these developments, how, people to observe how people are dying, on the battlefield and how they are persecuted by drones. But war is not only the battlefield. Battlefield is most visible. Combat is most visible. Yes, we talked about different numbers, about wounded soldiers, about soldiers without limbs, about missing soldiers, about killed soldiers. But war basically has so many dimensions. And one of these dimensions connected to this situation with workforce. Ukraine experienced enormous lack of workforce. And nowadays, Ukraine officials are talking about inviting people from Argentina, Colombia, Bangladesh, and other countries. And this discussion is very tense. Why? Because many people consider this question in terms of this anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-Muslim rhetoric that is on the rise in the West. And due to this rhetoric, many far-right in different countries, including Germany, Austria, Sweden, other countries, France, gain popularity. And many, especially far-right, They are so concerned because they are saying, white men are dying in the battlefield. And what will happen next? They will bring, brown people, black people, not Christian people. So they consider this as a security threat for Ukraine. So there is no a good solution for this. And as long as war will continue, the more people will leave Ukraine. Even today, I have so many of my acquaintances and friends and relatives who consider to take their sons abroad before they turn 18, just in order to give them better perspectives and in order to spare them from this forced mobilization, in order to give them a future, basically, at least some future. Because what Ukraine proposed, officials constantly say, you should prepare for long war, you should prepare basically for forever war. So what next? People can't understand what is the plan. And more people, I mean, not only women who face no restrictions in movement, I mean men, are paying tens of thousands of euros and dollars just to escape Ukraine. They use different ways, they pretend to be, volunteers, they pretend to be musicians, they pretend to visit, some conferences abroad, and then they never return to Ukraine. So they pay for this, for these excuses, or they are hired by some, politicians as their drivers, and they just escape Ukraine. I was so shocked when, I left Ukraine, as some of our reviewers maybe know. I escaped Ukraine almost immediately after Russian attack in February 2022. But I often visit Europe for different academic events, academic conferences. So basically in 2022, when I visited, Czech Republic and Germany, most of Ukraine refugees were women and children. Year after that, in 2023, many of Ukraine refugees, and they hear Ukraine Russian language and Ukrainian language, were men. There were young men of the draft age with their families, with small children. So many men basically are very open about this. If you want forever war, send your children. Why your children are here? Why, a son of the ex-president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, is avoiding draft and ignores draft, messages, and he's living his luxury life in Great Britain. Why Klitschko's sons are in Germany? Why so many politicians have their sons here in US, where the education is so expensive? I teach at Clark University, and I observe it's enormous prices for Ukrainian people. The average monthly salary in Ukraine is approximately $600. But we all know how much Ukraine officials pay for the education of their children here. And, many of them are politicians without business involvement, without any business, without any commercial activity. So basically, they just stole these, money, these funds from Ukraine budget, allegedly. And their sons are, so basically, what we observe now, rich people in Ukraine getting more rich due to the war and, different schemes, and poor people became even more poor because they can't pay the bribe to avoid forced conscription. Yes. They are sent directly to the infantry and to the most heavy battles.
The last time we had you on the show, we played footage of, just some of the basically kidnappings of people being taken off the street to go be enlisted, to be forced to fight. Recently, Russia has been bombing some of these Ukrainian recruitment centers, and there have been reports of some Ukrainians on social media basically cheering this on because these recruitment centers are seen as the symbol of tyranny, forcing people to go off to die who don't want to. Now, I want to read you something though from the Washington Post in reporting on this. This is what the Washington Post says about the issue of military recruitment inside Ukraine. There is a great deal of Russian-sponsored content and propaganda on social media maintaining that Ukraine engages in highly unpopular forced recruitment of its citizens. So that's the Washington Post. I mean, is this just Russian propaganda that Ukraine is sending people off to die and engaging in what it calls unpopular forced recruitment?
Actually, of course, Russia instrumentalizes this, this tension, this anger, this frustration, because military draft officers, recruitment draft officers in Ukraine are associated with dictatorship, are associated with deprivation of basic human rights. And many people can't understand why they should die for this corrupted state, why they should die for autocracy. Because Ukraine is on its way to dictatorship. Because many signs, and we can talk about this later. So basically, yes, Russians are trying to instigate this anger. They are trying to support these people, but it's not only Russian propaganda and some Russian trolls, paid trolls. Why I'm saying this? Because after this, strikes on several recruitment centers in Zaporizhzhia, Kryvyi Rih, Kremenchuk, Poltava, many people, when you witness on social media how people comment on this, it was a humiliation for Ukraine government and for military commanders. That's why it was even an appeal of command of ground forces published in one of the mainstream Ukraine media, Ukraine Pravda, Ukrainska Pravda. It was appeal to the people, please stop. Those people are your defenders. They are part of Ukraine military, of Ukraine army that defends you from Russian, whores, orcs, and all this stuff. You should support them, not to cheer their deaths and, those wounded soldiers who were inside. And so many celebrity commanders, military commanders who are very present on the media, they pause their, outrageous pause. How dare you? We defend you. Stop laughing. Stop being happy about this. And security service of Ukraine started to trace all those comments. And yesterday, one man already was interrogated. And they make sure that this information will be leaked to the press in order to give a lesson to other people. Please stop doing that or you will face punishment. And we know recently, UN released a report about the human rights in Ukraine, and there is a great skepticism about the punishment for so-called collaboration. So the collaboration is such a broad definition in Ukraine that dozens of people are put on trial and charged with treason for comments on social media like cheering these attacks on recruitment centers. So basically nowadays, everyone who is critical about, for example, personal sanctions against, Ukraine imposed by Zelensky against his critics, or is not happy about beatings, kidnappings, and killings of people in territorial recruitment centers, they could be blamed for spreading so-called Russian propaganda to be the paid Russian assets and of treason. So basically, nowadays, martial law gives a lot of, free hand to security service and to all these law enforcement that use even military draft, selective military draft as a punishment against, human rights activists. Yesterday, one of the journalists who was highly advocating deeds of, draft officers, violent deeds, he was drafted. Why? Because he criticized the government. And, people say, why are you doing that? So basically, the government is sending a signal to all those critics. You can be on his place. You can be drafted easily, and sent to the front line, to the very hell. And guess what? What will happen to you, And what I must say regarding territorial recruitment centers, I invite our listeners and viewers to check the latest Viktor Orban post with condolences to one of their men, 45 years old from Transcarpathia. It's a Ukraine region. And this guy had both Ukraine and Hungarian citizenship, and he experienced forced mobilization. And he was so severely beaten that he died 3 weeks later. So basically, those stories are almost absent in Western media because they don't want to undermine these forced mobilization. Yes, because many of yes, thank you so much.
We're showing his picture on screen for our audio audience.
His sister shared the news about him and all the details about him, and he's not the first victim. We know so many little cases in different regions of Ukraine. Recently, the guy he was basically his father. He was a combat volunteer. His father was proclaimed missing on the battlefield 1 year ago in Pokrov, somewhere in Pokrovsk region. So he should be exempted from the military. But he was attacked by draft officers. He was beaten allegedly, and he died. Also, he died. He was 31 years old. So only in the past years, we found out 2 cases of deaths of those who experienced forced mobilization. And we all understand that during martial law, many people in Ukraine are not willing to expose this information, to make it public, because the trust to law enforcement in Ukraine is approximately, 10%. Nobody, because of the extreme corruption in this judicial system, in the police system, nobody trusts the government, but they really believe that they can face retaliation from the government. They can lose their, jobs for the criticism and exposing this information. They can be drafted to the military, or their relatives can face repercussions. So basically, it's only the top of the iceberg that we observe, but many people experience in Ukraine this, beating. Because why? One of the reason, because draft officers were given free hands, because commanders, soldiers, experts, they say in one voice, infantry, we need infantry. We running out of soldiers, and nobody wants to go there. I observe, these thousands of NAFO fellas on the internet, these brave, armchair warriors, and nobody wants to go to Ukraine infantry. Nobody wants to experience, chasing by Russian drone. Nobody wants to live their rest life without, limbs, without, penis, or without, eyes. So it's obvious that for many people, it's just game when real people are dying in Ukraine.
Let's talk about one of the Zelensky government's more recent and controversial appointments. Ukraine has something called the Institute of National Memory. It's basically a history division of the government. And they've just appointed this man to head it. Let's show him on screen. His name is Alexander Alfyorov.
Alfyorov. It's a very Russian name, actually.
Well, and talk to us about who he is. Talk to us about who he is.
So basically, Alexander Alfyorov is a historian, is a PhD. So he's basically was trained as a historian. He's a scholar in Ukraine. He has a very popular blog in Ukraine about Ukraine history, and many of these, his TV shows are dedicated, I would say, to decommunization and de-Russification of Ukraine history. So basically all this stuff. But what is more important? Alexander Alfyorov was a press officer of Azov regiment in 2014-2015, when this regiment was accused for so many war crimes in Donbas region, and when members of this regiment were very open about their neo-Nazi views and making Nazi salutes very openly, and they were very open extremists. After that, after 2022, he joined the Special Operation Forces Azov Kyiv and then became an officer of the Azov 3rd Assault Brigade, responsible for humanitarian question and, ideological question. So basically, for the logical training of young men who are recruited, who are lured to the army. So basically, he's telling them that glorious death for Ukraine is the best option for you, and you will be celebrated as hero. So go, and enlist and experience this, great glory. But what is important about Alfiero as well? The 3rd Assault Brigade in 2023, in one of the biggest museums in Kyiv, organized a photo exhibition that showed at least three photos of Waffen-SS Division Galicia. It was the collaborationist Nazi military formation that keep oath to Hitler and fight for Nazi Germany and committed war crimes in Slovakia, former Yugoslavia, and other regions. Some of the participants of this Waffen-SS Division Galicia participated in operation of Warsaw Uprising, in punitive operation against Polish people in Guta Ponianska and other cities in the territory of Ukraine and Poland and Belarus and others. And many of them actually were members of auxiliary police. So basically they were involved in the Holocaust. So this guy actually curated this exhibition. And guess what? Members of his brothers in arms, members of his assault brigade, they reenacted these photos. So basically, they compared themselves to Nazi collaborators, not Putin, not Skabeeva, not Solovyov, or other top Kremlin propagandists. They themselves. And this exhibition was curated by Alfiero. And guess what? Recently, when he was appointed, many people started to talk about his, background, about his use, and we found an interview recorded last year when he praised Hitler. He compared Hitler to Putin and said, "Oh, no, we can't compare those figures because Hitler, he received high German education. He was acquainted with high German philosophy and music. So basically, he advocated Hitler." And then, I listened to this interview, and as a Holocaust scholar, as a, person who teach Holocaust, I'm a Holocaust educator, and I listened how he started to defend, he said, Russians are trying to develop this myth that all Ukrainians are anti-Semites. And guess what? During the period of Ukrainian People's Republic, proclaimed in 1918, it was, separate state from Russia for the first, time in 20th century. They even organized the Ministry of Jewish Affairs, and they have the banknotes with Yiddish. And it was true. But then he stopped. But what happened next? The wave of anti-Jewish pogroms perpetrated by the army of these republics, and tens of thousands of Jews were killed, were wounded, were robbed, and were raped. And it caused one of the biggest wave of immigration to United States. I have so many students, my students here at Clark Universities, whose relatives came as a result of these pogroms. We know that many actors perpetrated those pogroms, including, White Army, Belogvardeyцы, and even some, parts of the Soviet Army. But the most pogroms were perpetrated by those, Ukraine nationalists, but this Ukraine army of Ukraine independent state. But he's saying nothing about this. So what do you expect from this guy on this, and I must say, this is the main national memory actor in Ukraine. It's a governmental institution. And we know that at least 50% of Ukraine budget is filled by Western countries. And all salaries of all government workers are paid by Western taxpayers. So I want to ask those Holocaust scholars, Holocaust descendants, Holocaust survivors, Are you ready to pay him salary? Do you want him on the top of this, institution in charge of creating national memory in Ukraine?
Yeah.
It's a shame.
These are questions. These are questions that I wish our media asked, but unfortunately, still not allowed to be discussed in the mainstream. We're going to wrap, Marta. So you said earlier that you're worrying that Ukraine is becoming a dictatorship. Is there any aspect of this that you haven't discussed yet in our conversation that you want to make sure we address before we wrap?
I want to address the question of so-called personal sanctions imposed directly by Zelensky. So in past weeks and months, Zelensky, by his personal decisions, imposed personal sanctions against some politicians, journalists, and bloggers. Most of them, of course, escaped from Ukraine, including Arestovich, his former advisor, who is very critical of what is going on in Ukraine nowadays. And this list is very wide and includes, people like, Bondarenko, who wrote this book, Joker, very critical towards Zelensky. So basically, many human rights organizations even in Ukraine. And recently, the Council of Europe Commission for Human Rights, they paid attention for this, and they are very critical of this because those sanctions are against Constitution. Because in order to impose sanctions, you need to prove that those people are involved in some terrorist activity and this must be proved in the court. But what Zelensky did? He did this against, all Ukraine laws, and it violates not only Ukraine constitution and Ukraine laws, but also those laws and international treaties signed by Ukraine. So basically those who say, Ukraine is such a vibrant democracy. No, guys, no. And what we observe, many media in Ukraine which were financed by USAID and pretended to be, liberal, independent, media, now they join this, bullying of these people sanctioned by Zelensky. They justify this to the public. They use slurs against those people, strong words, but the only, their fault is the harsh criticism of Zelensky and his team and the corruption and how they handle the war and how, they protect the children of their own, bodies from the front, because in Ukraine, military draft is very selective and targets, and it's used as a punitive instrument against dissidents, against some politicians. We know that Poroshenko is sanctioned nowadays. He can't freely, visit meet with some politicians abroad. So basically what we observe now, it has nothing to do with democracy. And if Zelensky will keep his power, I believe Ukraine will be rapidly turned into authoritarian state. But in the West, we have complete silence and justification because Ukraine are fighting for. It's an existential war. Yes, it is existential war for Zelensky regime and for his buddies, because war secures their political influence and their political power. Because
and for us, it's a proxy war that is being used to bleed a rival, Russia.
Exactly, and many Western politicians are so open about this. German commanders, we want to keep Ukraine fighting at least until 2030 because we should prepare, we should rearm. So how many Ukrainians should die to protect Europe from Russia and to satisfy the needs of, those warmongers in the West?
Another question that's just not being posed enough. It's in fact not being posed at all in the mainstream. And if we had a functioning democracy, it would. Marta, it takes a lot of courage to speak out the way you have. We're very grateful to you for joining us and sharing your insight. Marta Havryshko, visiting assistant professor at the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you again so much to Marta Havryshko. And previously we heard from John Kiriakou. And again, for the full interview with John Kiriakou, go and sign up to be a subscriber at usefulidiots.podcast.com.
And also, Marta has such an important voice, so always glad to hear from her.
That's our show. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiots.podcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.